Federico Fellini, one of the greatest filmmakers of the 20th century, attributes much of his success to a single dose of acid that he took in the summer of 1964, during a time which he described as a creative crisis. So here's the story of how one dose of LSD went on to impact and change cinema forever. According to a study looking into how this experience influenced his work, the dose was administered by one Dr. Emilio Savadio, one of the most prominent Italian psychoanalysts of the time. In fact, it induced a trip so intense that he had to be sort of put down with sedative medication in order to put it to an end. Fellini took part in the psychotherapy session directly after he had finished working on his masterpiece 8½, and before he started working on his next film, Juliet of the Spirits, in 1965. The talking therapy that occurred after the LSD dose was recorded using a magnetophone. The tapes have never been found by researchers, but in an interview with the BBC a year after the dose, Fellini explained how the experience stimulated his creativity by altering his perception of colour and allowing him to perceive colours in an entirely different light. The doctor gave me an explanation and I agree with him, he told the BBC reporter in 1965. He said that an artist lives always in the imagination, so the barrier between sensorial reality and his imagination is very vague. I saw colours not like they normally are. We see colours in the objects, you know? We see objects that are coloured. I saw colours detached from the objects. I had for the first time the feeling of the presence of the colours in a detached way. It's no surprise that Fellini's work after this acid trip was praised for having what one reviewer described as supernaturally brilliant colours. Fellini's perception of time was also altered during his trip, and this was also reflected in his work after the LSD. The authors of the study said his film started to incorporate plots involving, quote, puzzling and disorientating flashbacks. The filmmaker was also said to have had epiphanies during the trip involving space and the perception of self, both of which were apparent in his subsequent work. The work depicted in his post-LSD films include major changes in the perception of space, time, and others. Fellini's psychedelic therapy session took place before LSD was banned in the 1970s. In the 1950s and the first half of the 1960s, the drug was mainly used by academics, artists, and scientists who were fascinated by its potential therapeutic benefits. This all changed years after Fellini's trip because LSD started to appear on the hippie scene in the late 1960s. Timothy Leary, who was at the time a psychology professor at Harvard, famously quit his job to extol the virtues of what he described as the psychedelic sacraments and to help people turn on, tune in, and drop out.
We tell young people today, drop out of school, because schools, education today, is the worst narcotic drug of all. Don't politic, don't vote. These are old men's games. Impotent and senile old men that want to put you onto their old chess games of war and power. Drop out.
Before long, Leary spawned a flock of dedicated followers who started growing their hair, dropping out of conventional society, and protesting against the Vietnam War. This was simply too threatening for the authorities, who responded by prohibiting LSD, largely putting an end to the academic research and the therapeutic applications of psychedelics until the psychedelic renaissance started to revive it around 2 decades ago. So I spoke to the lead author of this study, Antonio Metastado, to see if I can learn more about how this particular trip influenced Fellini's life and his work. It seems that when you are on psychedelics, it somehow shuts down your default networks, he told me. The networks that are constantly working away in the background are shut down and the brain can make new connections. He added, it makes sense in a way because somehow you see a problem or you see an object from a different perspective, from a different view. Then you might make a connection or have ideas that you would not have had if you had continued to see that object or problem in the same way that you always did. I think it's always important to note when I sort of look at stuff like this, that if you just went out and took a load of acid, it's unlikely to have the therapeutic benefits that psychedelic assisted therapy would have. And that's because you don't just take the drugs with psychedelic assisted therapy, you also couple it with talking therapy about your experience of taking the drugs. So without the talking therapy, I don't think that people would get as much benefit. It's worth noting that. We'll never truly know what impacts that one dose of LSD had on the arts. According to the British Film Institute, Fellini's work inspired the work of other iconic directors such as Tim Burton, Woody Allen and Terry Gilliam. And you can see its influence on Hollywood in films such as The Trip, 1967, Altered States, 1980, and Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, 1998. And of course, it's not just the arts. In the world of technology, psychedelics have also played a massive role. Steve Jobs claimed that dropping acid was one of the most important things he ever did in his life. LSD shows you another side to the coin, he said, and you can't remember it when it wears off, but you know it. In the future, will people suffering from writer's block book themselves in for a dose of LSD to loosen the creative joints? That is unclear for now. Although, with the rise of the psychedelic renaissance, with ketamine-assisted therapy labs popping up, and Netflix documentaries like How to Change Your Mind, it wouldn't be all that surprising to me. As a society though, I feel like it's essential that we examine the mechanisms that are giving some people such powerfully beneficial effects. We're not reinventing the wheel here. Using these compounds in a therapeutic context is not new. It comes from at least 60 or 70 years ago, possibly much, much further back. It's important that we look at these old stories and use them to shape the present debate and the future of mental health.
I think that even if this road maybe is dangerous, I think that when one has had the intuition or the feeling, or one has opened that little door, I don't think that it can come back.